Today's episode is sponsored by my friends at Republic Boot Company in Houston, Texas. Republic Boot Company specializes in handmade, custom cowboy boots. There's an old piece of verse that illustrates the importance of boots to a cowboy that was written by E.A. Brennenstuhl in 1914. It says this: "The cowboy ain't no dandy when it comes to wearing clothes, but when he trails to the city, he'll go as other folks goes. But there's just two things he's wearing from which he never scoots. He'll stick to his old sombrero, and he'll stick to his high-heeled boots." Republic Boots can make just about any boot that you can imagine. From fancy to working, from modern to vintage. If you can dream it up, they can build it to fit your foot. Check them out at republicbootcompany.com. This episode is also brought to you by the members of my Patreon page, and I'd like to thank my Trail Boss member, Bob Kelly, for his support. Patreon is a platform that allows you to offer monthly support to creative projects that you enjoy, and in return, you get access to some exclusive content. If you're enjoying this show, you can become a patron of Cowboy Crossroads at patreon.com/Cowboy Crossroads. That's patreon.com/Cowboy Crossroads. I'd like to start today's show with a poem by the late poet Drum Hadley, whose name comes up in today's interview. This piece is from Drum Hadley's book, Voice of the Borderlands, and it's entitled Cowboys. If you see a feller standing around with a big, broad-brimmed hat, slouched down outside of a cantina in the borderlands, or maybe by the edge of a building in a little Mexican town, if he's looking across the lands towards the ends of those blue distances, and if he looks like he's half the man he could be without a horse between his legs, that feller might be a cowboy. But you never can tell just by looking. Howdy folks, this is Andy Hedges, and you're listening to Cowboy Crossroads. On each episode, I interview a different guest and ask them to share stories and discuss music, poetry, and culture from the working cowboy west and beyond. My guest today is rancher and mountain lion hunter Warner Glenn. If you haven't already listened to the first part of my interview with Warner, I'd recommend going back to the last episode and listening to part 1. Warner Glenn is the author of a book entitled Eyes of Fire about his encounter with a jaguar. You'll hear Warner tell that story in today's interview. Once again, Warner and I were joined by Warner's daughter, Kelly Kimbro, who contributes to the conversation. In the second part of our interview, I asked Warner to talk about the rancher's role as a steward of the land and his involvement in founding the Malpai Borderlands Group. Here's Warner Glenn.
Yeah, I tell you that's a big thing, Andy. I tell you what. Number one, if you're making a living on this country out here, this land, you've got to really take care of it because it's pretty fragile. You've got to really take care of it, or you're going to go broke and you're not going to be here long. So I tell you, most of the ranchers today use really good, range management practices. They alternate their pastures. They use rotation type grazing. They scatter their waters to get more water scattered out so the cattle can use different areas. And this country, the desert Southwest, one of our big problems, and we're in there right now, is drought. And I tell you, this summer it's going to be double tough going into the winter the cattle are in good shape right now, but going into the winter, it didn't grow any winter feed, so it's gonna be a kind of a tough deal this winter. But getting back to the Malpai group, there was a neighbor of ours. One thing we've seen in Arizona and other states, New Mexico too, is the land developers coming in and subdividing a lot of the country into 40-acre parcels, and fragmentation of the land is what they call it. And one of our neighbors up there, he said, and this was a fellow named Drum Hadley. You probably heard of Drum. He said, we ought to do something to keep that from happening in this area right here, the southwestern New Mexico corner and the southeastern Arizona corner. And so we had a meeting. Actually, we had that meeting right here at Malpai. Just about 9 or 10 ranches got together, and at that time, Drum Hadley and the Animus Foundation his foundation had bought the big Diamond A ranch, the Gray Ranch that's over here in southwestern New Mexico, and they had bought that from the Nature's Conservancy, who had bought it from a fellow by the name of Pablo Brenner. They bought it because it was just a unique piece of country, beautiful ranch land, cattle country, and they bought it they didn't know what they were going to do with it, but they didn't want some developer to buy it, so they went in and bought it. And then they were kind of up against it, and so they talked to Drummy, or Drummy talked to them, and Drummy's son, Seth, said, I think he probably said, Dad, we can swing this if we do it right. So they ended up buying that from Nature's Conservancy. But at that time when we started the Malpai group, some of those Nature's Conservancy people, a couple of the vice presidents became really good friends. And so they came to that meeting with us, and they said, here's what you have to do to keep these land from being subdivided. That we were mainly concerned about the upper end of this San Bernardino Valley, where it goes towards San Simon, and then the upper end of the Animus Valley. It was already starting to be fragmented on the sides in places, and divided up into 40-acre parcels, and some. So we decided to try to form a group and form a 501c3, so we could accept donations from people or other foundations that were interested in preserving land, open country, without to remain in cattle grazing lands, you might say. And so that's how the Malpai group, and I was one of the first ranchers. There's a few of them. Drum Hadley has passed away. His son Seth is still in the group, and quite a few of the ranchers are still in the group. Bill McDonald and the Winklers up here, and the Crinces are in the group. We have a good, but it's little. What we have to do is buy what they call conservation easements, which a rancher can put on his deeded land, and all it is said that this never will be fragmented into or sold off as subdivisions or like 40-acre parcels. It's got to remain in. You can sell the ranch, but it's got to, whoever buys it from now on will have to have it as grazing land, not subdivisions, that type of thing. So that's the main purpose of the Malpai group, was to keep the grazing land in agriculture. And there's not much, there's a few little farm land that entered into it, but most of it that we've had in mind was for grazing purposes.
So I'll add to the Malpai Borderlands Group conversation. It was met with a lot of opposition in the beginning because it was real rare that a group of ranchers invited scientists and biologists and land use organizations to the table. And it right out here on the front lawn, there's a picture of that first meeting, and it was very quiet because the land use agencies weren't talking back and forth.
Tell them which ones.
Okay, so this would have been Forest Service, BLM, the Arizona State Land Department, all the way down to the county level on agencies that came. We had NRCS. Through the years, a lot of agencies have come to the table and organizations because the Malpai Borderlands Group was so sensible and they were talking through it. At the point that they started was when other organizations were a little more violent. You'd see where a Caterpillar pushed a Forest Service truck off a road, or, there was a lot of people wanting to preserve the West, but instead of bringing the agencies to the table and trying to find common ground, which everybody had common ground, people didn't accept or acknowledge that the Forest Service wanted to preserve open spaces. State land has state trust lands in their care. Everybody had the same idea of preserving open spaces and managing the land for the best use, which is sustainable ranching in a lot of places. But when you got, at that point, a group of ranchers, the ranching community was afraid of Nature's Conservancy, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Game and Fish. They were afraid because up until that point, if you found an endangered species on your ranch, there was a pretty good chance your grazing rights were going to be either trimmed down, cut, or eliminated. And that happened a lot when they'd find a woodpecker in the Gila wilderness. And, the first thing they do is take cattle off the land. Well, what the Malpai did is they brought in the science community and the biologists, and then we did all kinds of studies. We let people come on this ranch and the ranches in the Malpai group area and study everything from rodents to bats to deer to antelope, everything, the white-sided jackrabbit. And then they compiled all those studies. There's an archaeological study that was done, which of course my mom was very interested in. It showed the cultures and the history of the region, and it also showed the evolution of animals and what we had today. Well, one thing that the whole ranching industry across the nation had gone through is people utilizing the land and not giving back much to it. So things like grassland restoration, watershed management, those were being born and starting to be trusted and used on a lot of different landscapes. There was a lot of land alliances that came to Malpai Borderlands Group. So we had a lot of visitors that came to the table with Malpai Borderlands Group, like the Maasai from Kenya, the Mongolians, because they are nomadic. They travel in a big circle with their cattle through the year based on rainfall, grazing, anything to survive. Well, their countries are being chopped up by land use agencies, changing the use or subdivisions or whatever. So when they saw the Malpai Borderlands Group was figuring it out, how to work with the agencies, we were a great place to be. And through the years, the Malpai has been very successful in spreading the word and keeping the peace. And there's a lot of times, there was times that there would have been a big issue on the table that could have caused some hard feelings and some hostility. And Malpai was always able to talk everybody through it and come out of it. Everybody came out of it working for the same common good for the landscape and sustainable cattle ranching. And open spaces and wildlife corridors. One thing that has affected us recently is this border wall, which we fought really hard to not have a border wall in this valley and going east into the Palencia Mountains. What it's going to do, and they're building it, we fought it hard, we lost that effort. So now we're trying to adapt and still stand up for wildlife corridors and trying to get the government to figure out how to maybe have some wildlife corridor activity. It's a very expensive endeavor for the federal government to put walls anywhere, but when they put them where they're needed, you can justify that. When they put them somewhere like in this valley where they were not needed, it's hard to justify. It divided our community, it divided families in the community, and of course everybody will get by and heal from that. It's affected us we're right on the front lines because 4 miles of it is the south boundary of our ranch. And we surround the wildlife refuge. Well, the border wall project's using water out of one of our wells. The choice was let them use it or they'd move 100 feet and drill their own well. So there's a lot of issues that have come up that have been conflicts, but unfortunately, we now have a border wall, and it's going to fragment our landscape because before that, the Malpai Borderlands Group worked with the Mexico side, with the ranchers on the Mexican side. It was a wide open landscape. Like when John Slaughter first came, I read a journal that was written by a man who went and bought 500 steers from John Slaughter, and he spent the night at John Slaughter's house, and the Mexican border was in place. It was a barbed wire fence. But the next day they went across the fence into Mexico, no big deal, and got the 500 steers, which were being held down there on those cienagas. So they got them and they took them and they drove them up Silver Creek and on to Tombstone. I mean, it was a really cool rendition of what happened in those days. But it also showed how the landscape was wide open, and that's what we have fought for with Malpai Borderlands Group, to keep open spaces. And so the border is really going to affect our theories.
I might add something that you might put in here. In most of Arizona and parts of New Mexico, but mostly in Arizona, a big thing, the land that we graze is either state land or forest permits or BLM grazing permit. So we have to work, that's the main agency she was talking about, and that was a big thing when we first started, is to get and they were willing, but a lot of the ranchers didn't want, there was a lot of friction, especially with a group like Nature's Conservancy also. But I tell you, they really got in and helped us. And their idea was it's a lot better to leave it the way it is, even if we graze it, rather than get it broken up into fragmentation. That's what. So they helped us a bunch. They sure did. I'll say that for them. Yeah, there's other groups that still want to get anything that goes wrong with the cattle on the country. They blame the cow or the sheep or the goat or whatever. But with good management, that doesn't hold much water anymore. With the good management practices, everybody uses it. Grazing is good for the country if you do it right.
Plus, the ranching industry is coming around pretty much across the nation. There is a lot of efforts for conservation and preservation. That's something that had to be accepted nationwide for it to work in one region. And that's why a lot of the alliances that were formed came down to see the example that Malpai Borderlands Group had set.
In an essay in Warner Glenn's 1996 book about his jaguar encounter, ecologist Raymond Turner wrote this: "It is my view that Warner Glenn encountered this remarkable animal in the Palencia Mountains mainly because of the area's undisturbed nature. Unlike the borderland country to the west, human population here not only declined during the early part of this century, it remained low afterwards because the ranchers of the area have been able to resist developers' inducements to subdivide." This region, encompassing extreme southeastern Arizona and New Mexico's Boot Hill, as well as adjacent lands in Mexico, may be the last large border area along a natural north-south migration corridor that suits this reclusive animal.
The first one, the first jaguar encounter that I had up here, well, one thing I'll say, they're very rare up here in the States anywhere. They used to have them a few in Texas, a few in New Mexico, and Arizona, of course. I think from 1907 or something like that, there's only been like 60 confirmed jaguar either killed or sightings in the state of Arizona. So that shows you it's pretty rare. Their habitat, they do have a breeding population south of us about 120 miles. But anyway, my dad never did see a jaguar up here. He never did. The Lee boys never did see one. But there's been a few coming in. So in 1996, Kelly and I were hunting here in the Palencia Mountains, right east of us here. And we were riding up a canyon. We split up. I let Kelly go up one fork of what we call Hog Canyon, and I took we had a lion hunting client with us, and also a young fellow named Aaron Prudler. He was helping us guide at that time. So Aaron and our client went around one way, which was kind of the long way, and Kelly was going to go up and cut a different country, and she struck her dog. She took one dog with her, Maple, and Maple struck on a track after she'd gone about a mile from us, and Kelly told me on the radio, she said, "Dad, Maple just struck on a track, and I know it's cat, but I don't know if it's bobcat or lion." Because she couldn't find the track, but she said she's really pulling out on it and going north. And I said, well, heck, just let her go and try to stay with her, or stay with here in here. Now this is really rough country, and I told her we'd go on around the way we were going and circle in and try to meet them about 3 miles kind of northeast of us, which we did. Well, when we got up, she kept telling me, she said, Dad, Maple was really going fast. So we struck a trot and got around there, and I left Aaron bring the client because he was going fairly slow, and I struck a trot and sometime loping up this trail. There's a pretty good forest trail right there where we were going around. And I hit a long ridge and went up, and I could hear Maple, and my dogs heard Maple. And boy, they pulled out and went to her, and I thought, oh my goodness, they're going to go in and hit the track. Maple's trailing, and then they're going to go backwards on it because they won't know, So I was trying to get up there, and I heard them all start barking and pulling out. And I looked down on the trail. I caught up to where they had turned around and went the other way. I looked down on the trail, and there's a big old cat track going the way they're going. I said, wow. I said, they're going, I told Kelly, I said, well, they caught it. They went to Maple, but they're trailing a track going the other way. And she said, well, she might have been backtracking, but I don't think so. She was going too fast. So I pulled out. I said, come on up and get with Aaron and our client. And Al Creedeman was his name, Al. And I said, I'll stay trying to stay in the hearing of those dogs. At that time, we didn't have locating collars. We had to stay in hearing of them when they were running the track. So they pulled out and went east, and man, they were smoking it. I mean, they were just running. I thought, man, that thing's running. A jump lion usually doesn't run that far. So, I mean, they ran over about 2 big old mountains. And when I got to the edge of the second mountain, there was a big rim of bluffs, and they were already crossing the canyon below it and going on. And I could hear them start, I thought I could hear them start barking bayed. And I told Kelly on the radio, I said, they've got that, they finally bayed that thing. And I said, it's got to be a big old lion, because I saw the big track back on the trail, and it was a trotting track. So when I got down there at the bottom, I had to lead my mule off a big old rim there and get down. This is a steep mountainside and probably half a mile to the bottom of the canyon. When I got down there, those dogs had pulled out again, and I told Kelly on the radio, I said, man, they're pulling out again, Kelly. I said, I've got to keep going, just keep coming this way. And she said, well, we will. But by then, they were 3 or 4 miles behind me. So they ran over a big peak and over another peak, and when I got up on that second peak, I could hear them barking bayed down there, and I looked and I could see this animal on top of a pillar of bluff rock, a kind of a pinnacle down there in this big brushy basin. And I thought it was a big old lion, because I couldn't tell from that far. I could just tell it was a big cat or something. So I told Kelly on the radio, I said, well, they finally got that thing bayed, and maybe it'll stay here. So I'm going to get down there with them. So I rode around with my mule, and I had to come down a long ridge to where that peak. And so when I got right above where they were, I didn't want to run it out and make it get further, and I thought it still thinking it was lion. I tied my mule, and I started to walk down there so I'd keep my eye on it. And I went around some bushes, and I could see then it was a big old tall jaguar, and it was crouched on top of that bluff. And I thought, oh my gosh, I said, it's a jaguar to myself. Of course, there's nobody there but me. So I ran back to my mule, and I got my camera out of my saddle horn pouch, and I snuck back down there, and I took a picture of that thing because I didn't think nobody was going to believe me. It was a jaguar, and number one, I really wanted to get a picture of it, because at that time, now they weren't on the endangered species list, but they were protected. You couldn't kill one. They were on the proposed endangered species list, but they weren't on it yet. That was 96, March. So and then I went to slipping down there. I told Kelly on the radio, I said, Kelly, I said, and I was kind of whispering, so this wouldn't, I said, they've got a big old jaguar bait. I said, come on and get over here, and we'll try to get some pictures, and you can help me get these dogs off. And so she said, we're coming as fast as we can, Dad. We're along. They were by now 7 or 8 miles behind me. And I knew it was going to take 2 hours at least for them to get. So I went on down, and that thing looked around and saw me, and then it looked back down. The dogs were underneath this bluff, baying at it, and it turned up and saw me, and then it walked, and I was snapping pictures, and it walked over the bluff out of sight of me, and I thought, oh my gosh, and it was too far. It was about a 40-foot jump he'd had to make straight off. And when he saw that, I couldn't see it, but then I saw him coming back, and he came right back up over towards me, and then went down and jumped off at the shallow side, the uphill side of this pinnacle. And boy, I heard the dogs all pulling out. And I told Kelly, I said, that thing jumped and ran, Kelly. I said, I've got to go on. So I ran back up the hill and got on my mule. And the next time I could hear them baying, they were off in a canyon, in a box canyon. And so I pulled off. I was frantic then to get those dogs stopped, because I was afraid of getting something killed. They're pretty notorious for killing dogs. Those jaguars are. They're mean sons of guns. They're a little cranky when you get them riled up. So I got, when I took my mule as fast as we could go. I mean, I was whipping and spurring, and we were rolling boulders and rocks, and we got down there. They were like a half mile from us. So when I got down there pretty close, I jumped off. I could hear that darn jaguar kind of roaring, kind of a roar, that type of, it sounded like a darn brave bull when he's bawling a little bit. And I thought, dang, at first I wondered what that noise, and then I said, that's that darn jaguar making that noise. I mean, he was really mad. And so I jumped off and I tied my mule, and I slipped down there with my camera. And my plan was to get those dogs when they were barred. They had him bayed in this little shelf under, it was a rocky series of little waterfalls like 4 or 5 feet high going off of this canyon face. And he was in under one of those, and they were right on top. So when I got around down closer, I was trying to get those dogs back, and when I got down to where you see him, I snapped a couple of pictures, and I was too close. I was too close, and boy, here he came. He came right out there, right supposedly through there was, I had 6 dogs, I think, and there was 4 of them on top, and 2 of them I didn't know where they were. So he came, he was charging me, and those dogs met him head on, and boy, they rolled head over heels back in there, and he grabbed one of the dogs by a hind leg, and he broke the leg. He had a dog with the name of Maple. The one that Kelly had with us started that morning. He had her, well, so I kicked a bunch of rocks and stuff in on there, and it hit the jaguar on the back. He was under me about probably 8 or 10 feet. So I just kicked some rocks and stuff, the small stuff in there, and that trash hit him on the back, and he turned old Maple loose and turned around, and then I got those other dogs back, and Maple jumped off and got out of there, packing that leg, of course. But I got those other dogs back, and when I did, he looked around, and then he pulled out. I could see him go out of sight and across the little canyon, and I got all the dogs stopped except 2 young dogs. B was one of them. Anyway, 2 of the young dogs took after him again. I had the others tied. I tied those others because they were pretty well whipped. I mean, they were hurting, and of course Maple had a broken leg. So I couldn't. I was hollering at them, trying to get them to stop, but I couldn't. But I got those other dogs tied. I told Kelly, I said, Kelly, I had to let that thing go. I said, I'll meet you at the truck. I'll try to get. I said, I'm missing 2 dogs, and I'm going to try to catch up with them and get it. Well, they came back, and I think there were 2 young dogs, and I think that thing whipped them. I think it put the fear into them. I think it turned on them and whipped them, and they came back to me. So I got on the dog, and I got out of there, and the last I saw the jaguar, he was heading south toward the Mexican border. This took place about 12 to 15 miles north of the Mexican border. So that's what, and he went on south. Anyway, no more that, I went on, I got Maple, took her down and met Kelly at the truck. Of course, we took her to the vet. I had a $500 vet bill on the dog, not only on Maple, and that was in '96, so that's quite a bit of money. But anyway, I got a lot of pictures of that son of a gun, and really, we didn't know. I knew it was a touchy deal, even having that thing up here, but it was kind of neat in a way, because if the jaguar, we were kind of, at that time, the Malpai group was big on preserving open country for wildlife and everything, and I thought it was kind of neat. So I shared the pictures, and we thought, well, it's all right to go public on it, so we did. And I printed a little book. I'll give you one of those books. But then the second one was 2006, and we were lion hunting over in the Animas Mountain in southwestern New Mexico. This first one was in the Palencia, and that's right on the New Mexico-Arizona state line. And where we hit the track that morning, this is the first one in '96, we hit the track in Arizona, but where we made that thing was on the New Mexico side, so it was actually in the New Mexico where I took those pictures. Anyway, going to 2006, we had lion hunted 3 or 4 days on the big mountain they call the Animas Mountain over there in southwestern New Mexico, and we had stopped for lunch, and we had two people that were hunting, who were friends of the ranch, and then 2 of the cowboys of the ranch with us, and then Kelly and me and another friend of ours. That was quite a little group. And we stopped for lunch, and we ate lunch, and one of the dogs that we had with us was crippled, so I told Kelly, I said, after we started riding again, we'd ridden about a mile, I said, Kelly, if you don't mind, take that crippled dog back to the truck and trailer, which was about 3 miles from us at that point. We had made a big circle, and we'll go on and cut some other country down here this afternoon, and you can move the truck and trailer down, and we'll meet you at a certain point, which she did. She left, and right after she had left, I had noticed a dog I called Powder going off of the right-hand side of this hogback ridge we were on. And I asked David, one of the cowboys, I said, David, do you see old Powder? And he said, no. I said, well, he went right off this north side of this mountain here, and I better get out and see if I can hear him barking. He must have hit something. So I rode out on this point, and David called me on the radio, and he said, Warner, he said, Powder just caught up with us here. And they had waited for me. I was going to go out and just see if I could hear him off this big high bluff. They had waited, and I said, and he said, something grabbed a hold of him in his throat, in the point of his shoulder. He's got big old holes, like teeth marks, and he's bleeding pretty good. And I said, dang, I said, he must have jumped a javelina hog, or they have feral hogs over there too, wild hogs. And I said, they either jumped one of those, because I knew if it was a lion, they would stayed with us, or been bayed. So while I was standing there, they brought old Powder on up to me. As soon as we got up, I got off and went to look at the Powder, and you could darn sure tell there were big old tusk marks right there. And he wasn't bleeding bad, but it had already stopped, but it run down his leg. And he was kind of cowed acting. I mean, timid acting, which wasn't. And I thought, boy, he must have hurt him pretty bad. While we were talking this all over, all of our dogs just pulled out. They went off that bluff down a long chute there, and we heard them open up down the mountainside there and just pull out. And I said, oh my gosh. I said, those dogs winded that bunch of hogs or javelina or whatever they were, and they're running those dang things off the mountain. And so we all ran out on top of this bluff, and we could see them way down there. By now they're a half a mile, just hooking it off and down. They'd already hit the bottom of a big canyon, was going out, and we couldn't see what was ahead of them. But when they got over into the next canyon, we could hear them baying. So I said, well, listen, they got that dang thing bayed or whatever, and I still thought it was a hog or a javelina. So I said, I'll go off here on my mule. It was a long way, and I didn't want to have everybody have to go down in that hole and climb all the way back and just save the mules. I said, just wait here, and I'll go get those dadgum dogs. I was cussing the dogs. So I went off there, and I was hurrying because I knew they had what it was bayed, and I knew some of them going to get cut up because I thought, still thinking it was javelina probably or a hog. So when I got over there about 200 yards from them, I could see them. They were all baying this thing, and every once in a while they'd scatter, and then they'd go back. And I looked up there, and in the shade, I could see this big old cat crouched, and it looked like a real dark-colored a big old tall lion. I mean, of course, I was 200 yards from it. But it was in the shade of that bush. I couldn't see the rosettes, the spots. And I got on the radio and said, darn, David, I said, bring those guys down there. They have a big old tall lion bayed. Well, Kelly had heard us talking, and she on the radio, so she had started back to the top of the mountain, and rather than go to see what we were going to end up doing. So I said, I'll get over there back. So I rode on around there, and about that time it charged those dogs, and that's why they were scattering. They all scattered, and it went out in the sun, and I could see this big old jaguar. And I thought, oh, my word. I got on the radio, and I said, David, I said, they have a big old tom jaguar bayed down here. I said, get down here, you guys, and help me get these dogs. I said, we got to get them out of here. We're going to get a bunch of dogs killed. And so they did, boy, when they heard that. I looked up one time when I was riding around to get on the other side of the dogs where they were baying the jaguar. I looked back, and you could see there were two cowboys and the two hunters were coming. Kelly and the other guy hadn't got back to the top of the mountain yet from the truck, but and I could see it was dusty, and you could see those dust trails look like little jet airplanes coming off that long mountain. They were slipping and sliding, but they were smoking it, trying to get over there to help me get those dogs. Well, about that time, I got around up above it, and I got off my mule, and I didn't tire. It was a red kit car. I thought, geez, and I was a little smarter. This is 10 years later than the person, but I knew that I didn't want to get down there with 10 or 12 feet of this thing. I wanted to give it. So I got within about 40 feet, and I stepped off my mule, and I just left the reins dragging, and I went to taking pictures. About that time, one of my little females named Rietta looked back at me, and that thing ran out and got her, bit her right at the top of the hip, and just put her on the ground and bit her another time, and then he just walked back and backed up against that bluff rock that he was. There was a big cedar tree there. I'll show you a picture of it. A cedar tree, and he was backed up against a bluff right there, or a rock face. It was just a big boulder, actually. And so I went to hollering for my dog. I went to bawling them out and hollering and saying, yeah, trying to get them out. And they started coming, and as soon as that thing saw him leave, boy, he turned around and pulled out, and he ran off the mountain. Right, and the dogs were looking at me, so they didn't see him leave. He ran, and he was going right towards those guys that were coming off the mountain on their mules. So he ran across the bottom of a little canyon up the other side, and by then the dogs looked around and saw he was gone, and I couldn't stop them. They took after him again. But they were running the scent channel, which with their noses in the air. They weren't running by sight, but they were running that scent channel, we call it, is the body scent, and it drifts. It drifts with, if there's a breeze, that scent channel will drift. So they were running towards where the jaguar had run, but about 30 or 40 feet to the left of it. But they were still they were following the scent in the air. But when they got over there, they were above that thing, and it stopped. It stopped. I saw it crouch. I'd run out there where I could see it. I saw it crouched, and I could see that big old head turning and listening. And old David and them were coming right into it. They was going to run right into it. And I told David, I said, David, that thing pulled out, and it's right there ahead of you, about 50 yards right ahead of you. And you can see those guys going to horse putting on the brakes. And about that time, that thing pulled out again and ran right down a long ridge, and all the dogs got after it. And those two cowboys were loping down the ridge on each side of the dogs and that thing. But I didn't get a picture. I would love to have had a picture of it, but it's in my mind. But they bayed it again under a big old tree. It never did tree, which is very interesting. Neither one of those jaguars that I ran into treed. They bayed on the ground. And it backed up against a big cedar tree down there, and they had it bayed. So by then we were all together. I'd got my mule, and I caught up with them, and we got all those dogs and caught them and got them back and held them. And that thing, as soon as we got those dogs and the pressure was off of it, it turned around and trotted off. And Kelly was up on that mountain. She was watching with binoculars now. She knew, and she saw it going on. And that thing went on north, actually. It didn't go back towards Mexico. We weren't far from the Mexican border, like 10 or 12 miles, but it kept going north towards the big old Animas Peak. But anyway, that's the last we saw of it. The next day, just to follow up a little bit on that, the next day we left our dogs home. I wanted to see if it had a kill down there, like a calf or a deer or whatever. I wanted to see what happened where it ran into powder the first time, because I thought he must have had a kill right there. But we found the jaguar's tracks. We found a little bit of blood where powder, he'd got old powder, but we didn't find any of the kill, and we never hit it. We went ahead and had a good hunt with those guys, caught a couple of lions. In the next 4 or 5 days, we never saw any more sign of the jaguar. But anyway, that's the two that I've seen. It's an experience and a rare one.
Yeah. I just want to say thank you to both of you for taking the time to tell me these stories, and your hospitality, letting me and my family come out to the ranch. It's
Andy,
a
you're
real
mighty
pleasure to be
welcome.
here.
You're sure mighty. We're glad to have you. Honored to have you want to do it. But you're sure welcome.
All right, folks, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Warner Glenn and Kelly Kimbro for taking the time to visit with me. If you'd like to learn more about Warner's encounter with the jaguar, I'd recommend you pick up a copy of his book, Eyes of Fire. It includes the story and also Warner's wonderful photographs. I'd like to thank Republic Boot Company for sponsoring today's episode. You can find out more about Republic Boot Company at republicbootcompany.com. I'd like to thank my Patreon Trail Boss member, Bob Kelly, for supporting this episode. You can become a patron of Cowboy Crossroads at patreon.com/Cowboy Crossroads. You can find out more about me and this show at andyhedges.com. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help me keep it going, you can make a donation on the website. You could leave a review on the iTunes store, or you could simply tell a friend to listen to the show. If you'd like to contact me with a question or a comment or a story, I'd love to hear from you. Send an email to andy@andyhedges.com. Thank you for listening to Cowboy Crossroads.